Rick Pitino is a psycho, and possibly the greatest coach to ever do it at the collegiate level. I just finished his book, Full Court Pressure, about the 1991-92 Kentucky basketball season. This book deserves a lot more attention, and I'm going to give it that. In his book, Rick Pitino shares things like the issues he had with the media. Jerry Tipton, to be more specific. But even Dickie V catches strays on page 124. He talks about how he almost fought Dale Brown. Oh, and he mentioned John Calipari over and over again. Calipari's name is mentioned so much in this book that Rick should have dedicated it to him. But none of that makes Rick Pitino a psychopath. Evidence for his psychopathy could be found in stories such as when he forced his players to overeat so that they would throw up at practice. And when he writes about the time he completely lampooned a referee with this line. I got so upset early once, in the first half I picked up the phone on the scorer's table and handed it to a referee. "It's for you," I said. "It's refereeing school." But the story that is told in this book is one every Kentucky fan would love to read. It is one that should remind us as Kentucky fans that without Rick Pitino, our program could have fallen into obscurity. Kentucky had just fired Eddie Sutton after the NCAA dropped the hammer on the program following recruiting violations and payments to players. Kentucky swung at almost every giant in the game and whiffed on all of them. Pat Riley said the timing wasn't right, Coach K said no, and Arizona's Lute Olson was scheduled to come visit Lexington, but canceled and signed an extension with the other Wildcats. PJ Carlesimo became the main target. Carlesimo had just taken Seton Hall to the national championship game, and UK athletic director C.M. Newton was trying to lure him to Lexington. When Carlesimo turned Kentucky down because restaurants didn't stay open late enough or something like that, C.M. Newton changed his direction to go after Rick Pitino, who also said he was not interested. However, an unsung hero of Kentucky's historic success intervened. Pitino's GM at the Knicks, Al Bianchi, told Rick to keep the option open. Just like present day, Rick Pitino did not get along with his GM. He was worried Bianchi was trying to force him out, despite Pitino leading the Knicks to their first division title in over 20 years.
Okay, so if you're reading the book, you can actually go to YouTube, and all the moments that Rick Pitino talks about in the book, you can watch on YouTube, which is pretty cool. Also, you can go to KSR YouTube, which you're watching this on right now, and please hit that subscribe button so we can keep making content like this. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Pitino eventually accepted to come visit Lexington. While there, Jerry Tipton uncovered old allegations from Rick's time as a graduate assistant at Hawaii. And with Kentucky already buried under NCAA sanctions, university officials suddenly became terrified of hiring another coach tied to controversy. And at one point, C.M. Newton even considered just coaching the team himself until they could find a suitable replacement for Sutton. But in the end, Kentucky hired the coach who had just taken the New York Knicks to the Eastern Conference semifinals. And 36-year-old Rick Pitino took over with confidence.
I think University of Kentucky will get turned around in a very short period of time with me as the coach.
Pitino's first Kentucky team finished 14-14, but he had also convinced a future superstar named Jamal Mashburn to come to Lexington. The following season, Kentucky won the SEC regular season title, and finally in 1991-92, Kentucky was allowed to return to postseason play. The Cats entered the season ranked in the preseason top 5, but the year started with disaster. After beating West Virginia in the opening round of the preseason NIT, Kentucky got absolutely drilled at Rupp Arena by Pittsburgh. The loss meant that Kentucky would not be able to travel to Madison Square Garden for the rest of the preseason NIT. And ironically, it was Eddie Sutton's Oklahoma State Cowboys who would go on to win that tournament. But this is where the book starts to reveal who Rick Pitino really is. He had the team treat the Pitt loss like fertilizer to help future things grow. And Kentucky responded by ripping off 5 straight wins, including victories over a top 10 Indiana team and a 21-point blowout of John Calipari's UMass team. This was a very Rick Pitino thing to do. He says, "I didn't want John Calipari to be discouraged by the final score. I made a special visit to the Massachusetts locker room afterwards to speak to the team. And I invited John and his staff back to Bravos after the game. Maybe they got along better than we thought." I met John when I was a counselor at 5-Star Camp, and he was a camper. He wasn't that talented then. He was a good floor general, which is what you call point guards who can't play at the next level. Kentucky then traveled to Atlanta to take on Georgia Tech, and Rick Pitino got ejected in an 81-80 loss. Rick shared his thoughts about some referees throughout this book. And one chapter becomes very interesting in hindsight, because Pitino clearly understood exactly what the Kentucky-Louisville rivalry meant to both fan bases, which means when he eventually returned to college basketball to coach Louisville, he had to know Kentucky fans were going to take that personally. Kentucky eventually climbed back into the top 10 during an 8-game winning streak that included a win over Louisville. But the season still had moments where things nearly unraveled. After a loss to Dale Brown and LSU, Kentucky had dropped 3 of 4 games. And Pitino reacted to that losing streak in the most Rick Pitino way. He says, "To me, this was the low point of the season. I just hoped there are no bridges in Kentucky. I might have been tempted to jump off." You can see where Mark Pope gets his sense of humor. Thankfully for Kentucky, Junior Brady was there to lift their spirits. When he read this essay he wrote called Chance of a Lifetime. I'm not going to read it all here, but I suggest you do so. Kentucky closed the regular season winning 8 of its final 9 games and entered the SEC tournament ranked 9th in the country. The SEC tournament field that year was loaded. Kentucky beat Vanderbilt to advance to play LSU in the semis, but LSU would be without Shaquille O'Neal, who had been suspended after getting ejected the day before. Dale Brown was so furious about the suspension that he considered not even playing the game in protest. But the game was played. Kentucky survived against LSU and then absolutely destroyed Alabama 80-54 in the SEC championship game. The Big Blue was back. And for the first time since 1988, Kentucky was finally back in the NCAA Tournament too. The Wildcats rolled into the Sweet 16, where Rick Pitino and John Calipari met once again, this time in Philadelphia. Kentucky led by 21 before UMass stormed back into the game. With the lead cut to 2, referee Lenny Wirtz gave John Calipari a technical foul for being outside the coach's box.
There's some thought that Rick Pitino may have nudged the officiating crew just a little bit to, hey, watch out for that.
The Cats pulled away and advanced to the Elite 8 to play the 1 seed and the defending national champion Duke Blue Devils. We all know what happens for the rest of this story, but I'm going to save it for a different book review. It's on Gene Wojciechowski's book, The Last Great Game, about the Kentucky Duke game of 1992. And I just don't want to, I don't feel like doing the Leitner thing right now. I think most Kentucky fans have reached the point where they can fully appreciate what Rick Pitino accomplished here. He took us from Kentucky shame back to Kentucky greatness in an unbelievably short amount of time. Without Rick Pitino, it's possible Kentucky basketball becomes something much less significant than what we know today. Maybe even Indiana. When Pitino returned to Rupp Arena for Big Blue Madness a few years ago, the roar from the crowd proved something important. Big Blue Nation never forgot who helped bring Kentucky basketball back to life.
Before I pack it in coaching, I want to go back to Camelot for one more time.
Oh, and if you think Rick Pitino is going to retire, well, he may not. My dad worked until he was 67 and retired. He died 6 months later of bone cancer. To this day, I become squeamish when someone says they are retiring. This is a really good read. I highly recommend it. I give it a 10 out of 10 for Kentucky fans or fans of college basketball in general. Check it out. And if you want to be a part of our KS book club, go over to KS Board, sign up. I think they got a deal going on over there. So you can be a part of our book club where we're going through not just Kentucky books, but all kinds of sports books. And it's been a lot of fun. So for Kentucky Sports Radio, I'm Stephen Peak. We'll see you next time.